My husband locked me out of our life. He never expected the man I loved to let me back in. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who promised to love you? Have you ever felt the cold shock of realizing the person you share your life with sees you as property rather than a partner? This is the story of how I learned that the ultimate revenge isn't destruction, it's joyful reclamation. And it begins with a click of the lock was a sound I would remember for the rest of my life. It wasn't loud, but it was final. A precise, mechanical snick that severed me from warmth, from safety, from the life I thought I was building. It was the sound of a mask coming off, and it was louder than the pounding rain that had already begun to soak through the thin silk of my evening gown. I stood on the 30-story balcony, the city lights below blurring into a watercolor smear through the downpour. My husband, Robert, stood on the other side of the glass, a phantom in our beautifully appointed foyer. He was still in his tuxedo, not a hair out of place, his posture as rigid and perfect as the day we'd met. "Perhaps now you'll learn to hold your tongue," he said, his voice calm and polished, carrying easily through the glass. It was the same voice that charmed investors and dominated boardrooms. Now it was a weapon turned on me. 3 hours earlier, we had been at the pinnacle of our social world. The annual Children's Heart Foundation Gala, a sea of black tie and diamonds. Robert was being honored for his company's charitable contributions. I stood beside him, my hand tucked in the crook of his arm, playing my part perfectly. The devoted wife. The elegant accessory. Then, during his speech, he'd misquoted a key statistic about the success rates of pediatric heart surgeries. It was a small error, but it mattered. My mother had been a cardiac nurse. I knew the numbers. As he paused for applause, I leaned in, my smile never wavering, and whispered the correct figure. His head tilted a fraction of an inch. His knuckles, resting on the podium, went white. But he corrected himself, smoothly, effortlessly. The crowd never knew. But I knew. The car ride home had been a vacuum of silence. He hadn't spoken a word until we reached the penthouse, until he had guided me not into the living room, but onto the balcony. "You need a lesson, Lauren," he said now, his breath fogging the glass slightly. "Walking home might teach you some respect. But since that's impractical, 30 minutes in this should suffice. Think about the cost of embarrassing me." The cold was a living thing, coiling around my ankles, climbing my spine. The rain plastered my hair to my skull and dripped icy trails down my neck. I wrapped my arms around myself, a useless gesture. The chill was already inside me, a familiar tenant that had taken up residence over the last 3 years. This dramatic lockout was just the physical manifestation of a slow, insidious freeze, the gradual criticism of my friends, the suggestions about my wardrobe, the way my opinions on anything substantive, finance, politics, art, were met with a patronizing smile and a change of subject. I had been curated, like a piece in his collection, until the vibrant, opinionated woman I'd been was just a ghost in a designer dress. I didn't scream. I didn't pound on the glass. I just watched him. I watched the satisfied set of his jaw, the way he checked his Patek Philippe watch, a wedding gift for me, a symbol of a time I thought was built on love. I watched as he turned his back, a deliberate, calculated motion, and walked away, leaving me alone in the roaring silence of the storm. And as he disappeared into the depths of the penthouse, something in me, something that had been bending for 1,000 days, finally snapped. But it didn't break. It didn't shatter. It crystallized into something hard, sharp, and impossibly strong. The tears that mixed with the rain on my face were not of self-pity, but of a furious, long-suppressed rage. Then headlights. A pair of them, cutting a slow, deliberate path through the rain-slicked driveway below. A dark SUV. My heart, which had been a numb, frozen weight in my chest, suddenly hammered against my ribs. This was part of it. Of course it was. He would have someone witness my humiliation, document my breakdown. He was building his case. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, holding a large black umbrella. He didn't look up at the building. He didn't scan the windows. His gaze was fixed directly on me, as if he'd known exactly where I would be, a lighthouse beam finding a lost ship in a hurricane. My breath caught. It was Daniel. Daniel. The name was a punch to the gut, a key turning in a lock I'd sealed shut years ago. My Daniel. The one with the easy laugh and the calloused hands. The one who'd loved me for my fire, not in spite of it. The one I'd left because Robert's world of secure, mapped-out privilege had seemed safer than the wild, unpredictable passion Daniel offered. Robert had hired his security firm 6 months ago, boasting about getting the best. He comes highly recommended, he'd said, never once making the connection. The irony was so perfect it was cruel. Daniel didn't hurry. He never did. He walked with a grounded, purposeful stride, the same way he'd always moved, a man completely at home in his own skin and the world around him. He climbed the exterior steps to the balcony, his shoes making soft, sure sounds on the wet stone. He stopped before me, the umbrella creating a fragile, dry sanctuary between us and the storm. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned my face, my drenched dress, my shaking hands. There was no pity in them. There was a quiet, burning fury that mirrored my own. "Lauren," he said. "My name. Just my name." But on his lips, in that voice, deeper now, roughened by time and experience, it was a shelter I hadn't known I was starving for. It was a hand reaching into the coffin I'd been buried alive in. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He knew. He simply offered his hand, palm up. A question. An invitation. "Let's go." I looked at his hand, at the familiar scars across the knuckles, the strength in the lines of it. I placed my ice-cold, trembling hand in his warm, calloused one. A current, immediate and undeniable, shot up my arm, a jolt of pure, undiluted life. It was the spark that lit the fuse. As I climbed into the warm, leather-scented interior of his car, leaving the glittering prison behind, I knew Robert's lesson was over. Mine was just beginning. The safe house wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a sterile, anonymous motel room or a bleak safe room. It was a small, rustic A-frame cabin nestled deep in the pine forests an hour from the city. As Daniel pushed the heavy wooden door open, the scent of pine needles, old books, and wood smoke washed over me. A fire crackled in a riverstone hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with bookshelves. It was a place that felt lived in, loved. It felt like a home. Daniel moved through the space with an easy familiarity, his large frame somehow perfectly suited to the cozy environment. He lit a few kerosene lamps, their warm glow pushing back the night. He pulled a thick, wool blanket from a carved chest and wrapped it around my shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment, imparting a warmth that went deeper than the fabric. "Here," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the quiet space. He handed me a heavy crystal glass with 2 fingers of amber whiskey. "It'll warm you from the inside." Our fingers brushed during the exchange. It was a simple, accidental touch, but it felt like a dam breaking inside me. A memory, vivid and unbidden, flooded my senses. A summer night years ago, the two of us lying on a worn quilt in the bed of his pickup truck, parked out at Miller's Point. The air was thick with the smell of warm earth and night-blooming jasmine. We were watching a meteor shower, his arm a solid weight around me, my head on his chest. His lips on my temple, his voice whispering about a future that felt as infinite and bright as the stars above us. I had chosen a different path. I had chosen Robert, his world of crystal chandeliers and calculated conversations. I had chosen the safety of a man who promised to build a fortress around me, over the wild, unpredictable adventure offered by the man who promised to stand beside me while I built my own. Had let Daniel go, thinking it was the mature, sensible thing to do. I had traded shooting stars for spotlights. Now, sitting in his space, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived with authentic grit and purpose, the weight of that choice threatened to crush me. The blanket, the whiskey, the fire, it was all a kindness I felt I no longer deserved. "I didn't know you were back," I finally said, my voice hoarse from disuse and the cold. "Got back 2 weeks ago," he said, leaning against the mantel, watching me. The firelight played over the planes of his face, highlighting the new lines around his eyes, the subtle weathering that made him even more compelling. Robert hired me personally. Wanted a full review of your personal security. Said he was worried about your volatility. The word landed like a slap. Volatility. He said you'd been moody, unpredictable, that you were making rash financial decisions. He wanted me to keep a discreet eye on you. Said he was concerned you might do something impulsive. The cold inside me turned to a hot, sharp shame. Robert had been laying the groundwork, painting a picture of an unstable, hysterical wife.
Why?
To discredit me? To have me committed if I ever challenged him? To gain sole control of our assets? The possibilities were dark and endless, a labyrinth of manipulation I was only just beginning to map. I'm not volatile, Daniel, I whispered, looking into the flames, unable to meet his gaze. I know. The two words were absolute, a rock in the shifting sand of my reality. I've been watching for 2 weeks, Lauren. I've seen the way he talks to you in restaurants, the subtle put-downs disguised as jokes. The way he dismisses your ideas. The way you shrink. You get quiet. You fold into yourself. I saw a ghost of the woman I knew. The one who argued with me about 19th century poetry and could rebuild a carburetor. And it made me want to break every bone in his body. The raw, protective fury in his voice was a balm and an accelerant. It validated my pain and fanned the embers of my own anger. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry for years. Tears of frustration, of loneliness, of feeling utterly erased, welled in my eyes and spilled over. He locked me out. I said, the absurdity and the sheer cruelty of it finally hitting me with its full force. In the rain. To teach me a lesson. Daniel's jaw tightened. A muscle flickered in his cheek. He pushed off the mantel and knelt before my chair, bringing us eye to eye. He reached out, his thumb gently, so gently, catching a tear as it traced a hot path down my cold cheek. The contact was electric. It was more than comfort. It was a recognition. A claiming. It was the touch of someone who saw the real me, buried under years of polish and pressure, and was hell-bent on digging her out. The lesson is over, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was both a promise and a threat. From now on, we write the curriculum. He stood, offering me his hand again. Come on. You're freezing. A hot shower. Then we talk. He led me to a small bathroom, the walls clad in fragrant cedar. He started the shower, and steam quickly filled the room, fogging the mirror. I'll be right outside, he said, his gaze holding mine for a heartbeat too long before he closed the door, leaving me in the warm, clouded solitude. I peeled off the soaked, ruined silk, letting it fall to the floor in a sodden heap. As the hot, near-scalding water cascaded over my skin, washing away the grime of Robert's cruelty and the chill of the storm, I felt something else awaken. A long-dormant hunger. A memory of desire that was not about performance or duty, but about connection, about fire, about losing and finding yourself in someone else all at once. When I emerged, wrapped in a thick, sun-warmed towel, my skin flushed and finally clean, he was waiting. He had changed into a simple gray t-shirt and soft sweatpants that did nothing to hide the powerful, lean lines of his body. In his hand was another towel, which he used to gently, methodically, dry my hair. We stood there, in the intimate silence of the cabin, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft, rhythmic rasp of the towel on my hair. His movements were slow, deliberate. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the clean, masculine scent of his skin, soap and pine, and something uniquely him. My heart was a wild, frantic drum against my ribs. This was the point of no return. To step into this, with him, was to declare war on the life I had built, to burn the gilded bridge back to Robert forever. But looking at him, feeling the rightness of his presence, the solid ground he represented, it wasn't a choice at all. It was a homecoming. I reached up and stilled his hand with mine. Our eyes met. The air between us crackled with the weight of years of unsaid words, of a love that had been put on hold but had never, ever died. Daniel, I breathed. It was a surrender and a command all in one. It was all the permission he needed. His kiss was not gentle. It was a conflagration. It was years of longing, of regret, of fury at the world and ourselves for the paths not taken, all distilled into a single, devastating point of contact. His hands came up to frame my face, his thumbs stroking my jawline as his mouth claimed mine with a desperate, consuming hunger. I met him with equal fire, my fingers tangling in the soft, thick hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer until not a sliver of light could pass between us. The towel around my body loosened and fell to the floor, but I felt no shame, no cold. Only the incandescent heat of his skin against mine. This was not the careful, calculated intimacy I had with Robert. This was a rediscovery, a reclamation. It was taking back my body, my desire, my right to feel a passion that was messy and real and all-consuming. He broke the kiss, his breath ragged, his forehead resting against mine. His eyes were dark with a storm of emotion, desire, tenderness, and a fierce, protective rage. Every muscle in his body was taut with the effort of restraint. "Are you sure?" he rasped, the words scraped raw from his throat. In answer, I took his hand and placed it over my heart, letting him feel its frantic, alive beat beneath his palm. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He swept me into his arms as if I weighed nothing and carried me to the bedroom. The room was spare, dominated by a large bed with a simple iron frame, piled high with quilts. He laid me down on the cool, soft cotton sheets and followed me down, his weight a welcome anchor. Then he worshipped me. He worshipped me with his hands, his lips, his tongue. He traced the map of my body as if rememorizing a beloved landscape, paying homage to every curve, every hollow, every secret place. He kissed the pale, invisible bruises Robert's words had left on my soul, and with each touch, he healed them. His mouth was a brand of possession and reverence, and I arched into it, a flower turning desperately toward the sun after a long winter. When he finally entered me, it was with a slow, deliberate intensity that shattered the last of my defenses. It was not just a joining of bodies, it was a fusion of souls, a homecoming. Tears streamed from my eyes, not from pain, but from the overwhelming, devastating rightness of it. This was what had been missing. This raw, unfiltered connection. This passion that was both tender and fierce, that made me feel both powerful and vulnerable, seen and cherished. We moved together in a rhythm that was ancient and brand new, the world outside, the rain, the penthouse, Robert ceasing to exist. There was only this, the slide of skin on skin, the hitch of his breath in my ear, the building, coiling pressure deep within me that grew and grew until it burst, tearing a broken, sobbing cry from my throat. He followed me over the edge, his own release a low, guttural groan against my neck, my name a ragged prayer on his lips. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the quiet dark, the only sound our slowing heartbeats and the soft sigh of the wind in the pines. His arm was draped possessively over my waist, his breath warm, and even on my shoulder, I felt whole. For the first time in years, the fractured pieces of myself clicked back into place, fused together by the heat of his love. He shifted after a long while, propping himself up on an elbow to look down at me. In the dim light filtering from the main room, his eyes were soft, but the resolve in them was diamond hard. "This changes everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion and spent passion. "No more hiding. No more playing his game by his rules." I reached up, tracing the strong, familiar line of his jaw. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we take him down," he said, the words simple, absolute, and terrifying. "Not just for what he did tonight. For every day of the last 3 years. For every time he made you doubt yourself. For every friend he pushed away. For every piece of you he tried to smother. We take everything from him. And we do it together." A slow, fierce smile spread across my face. It felt unfamiliar on my lips, this expression of unadulterated, vengeful joy. The cold, strategic corporate wife was gone. In her place was a woman in love, a woman wronged, a woman ready for war. Together, I agreed, my voice steady and sure. And as I leaned in to kiss him again, a kiss of sealing our pact, I knew this was more than an affair. It was an alliance. The first and most important strike in a battle we were already winning. Robert thought he was teaching me a lesson about power. He had no idea I was about to become the master. The morning after was not awkward. It was a dawn of quiet certainty. I woke with the first gray light filtering through the pine trees, with Daniel's arm still a heavy, warm band around my waist, his breathing steady and deep against my back. For a long time, I just lay there, listening to the chorus of waking birds and the solid, reassuring beat of his heart. This was peace. This was home. It was a feeling so profound it ached. He stirred, his hand splaying across my stomach, pulling me closer against him in his sleep. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep, and he pressed a soft, absent kiss to my shoulder. "Morning." I turned in his arms to face him. In the soft, pearly light, he looked younger, the lines of constant vigilance around his eyes softened by sleep. "I don't want to leave this room," I whispered, tracing the line of his collarbone. "We won't. Not yet." He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch sending a fresh, warm current through me. "But we have to talk about what comes next. We can't just react to him. We have to lead." He was right. The passion of the night had been a catalyst, a nuclear explosion that cleared the decaying structures of my old life. But now we needed a blueprint. We needed an army. Over coffee that was strong and bitter, just how I remembered he liked it, we sat at the small, scarred kitchen table, our knees touching beneath it. Daniel laid his phone between us, a sleek, black tool in this rustic setting. "First, we need legal firepower. Robert controls every high-priced firm in the city. We need someone he can't buy, can't intimidate." He pulled up a contact. "Megan Croft. She's a shark, but she has a heart. She left a partnership at Harrington and Gray to start her own practice specializing in helping women escape powerful, abusive men. She's been waiting for a case like this." I knew the name. She'd taken on a state senator the previous year, exposing his hidden assets and securing a settlement that had made headlines. "Can we trust her?" "With our lives," Daniel said, his gaze steady. "She's my cousin." The revelation was a shock and an immense relief. This wasn't just a business alliance. It was familial. It was a layer of protection and loyalty Robert's money could never fracture. "Second," he continued, pulling up another file, this one protected by multiple encryption symbols, "we need a digital ghost. Chloe Bennett. She's a forensic accountant and white hat hacker. She can follow the money Robert has been hiding through a dozen shell companies, and she can make us invisible online. She can build him a digital coffin, and he'll happily lie down in it himself." He was building a war room in this quiet cabin, and I was being appointed his general. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What do you need from me?" I asked, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "Everything," he said, his gaze intense. "Every detail, every slight, every financial record you can remember, every password you might have overheard. We need dates, times, amounts. We need to build a profile of his cruelty, his patterns, his secrets. Your memory is our primary weapon right now." So I talked. I started from the very beginning, from the charming, impossibly attentive man Robert had been, to the gradual, insidious control that had set in like a slow-acting poison. I described the suggestions about my friends, that Sarah was too dramatic, that Chloe was a bad influence. The concern about my spending, which had led to him, helpfully taking over the household accounts. The way he'd slowly, expertly separated me from my work as a graphic designer, my passion for painting, until my entire world had shrunk to the pristine, gilded cage of our penthouse and the social calendar he dictated. I told him about the $10,000 withdrawal from our joint savings I'd questioned just last week, the one that had led directly to last night's lockout. I told him about the other women, The lingering scent of perfume in his car, the late-night business calls where his voice was a shade too intimate. The pearl earring I'd found under our bed months ago, which he'd gaslit me into believing I'd simply misplaced. Daniel listened, his expression growing darker and harder with each revelation, his hand never leaving mine, a silent conduit of strength. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer platitudes. He just let me pour out the poison that had been festering inside me, giving it a place to go, to be transformed from shame into evidence. When I was done, my voice hoarse and the coffee long gone cold, he stood, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. He pulled me to my feet and into a fierce, crushing hug, his arms like steel bands around me. "It ends now," he vowed, his voice low and deadly serious against my hair. "I promise you, Lauren, it ends now." Megan and Chloe arrived together that afternoon, a study in contrasts. Megan was all sharp angles and sharper intelligence, a sleek panther in a tailored black pantsuit, her blonde hair in a severe bob that framed a face with eyes that missed nothing. Chloe was her opposite, a hummingbird of colorful tattoos and untamed curly hair, her energy chaotic but her mind, I would soon learn, a precision laser. She wore a hoodie with a coding joke on it and carried 3 laptops in a worn backpack. Daniel made the introductions in the cabin's main room, the fire now a cheerful glow against the overcast day. "Lauren, this is Megan and Chloe. They know the broad strokes of the situation." Megan stepped forward, her handshake firm and brief. "Daniel's given me the overview. We're going to need to move fast. Robert will have already filed a missing persons report by now, painting you as emotionally fragile and a potential danger to yourself. We need to get ahead of that narrative immediately. I'll be drafting a preemptive statement to the authorities and preparing for an emergency hearing for a protective order." Chloe was already a whirlwind of activity, transforming the rustic dining table into a high-tech command center. Laptops whirred to life, external hard drives were connected, and a complex setup of monitors glowed. "I've already started a passive trace on the financials Daniel sent over," she said, her fingers flying across a keyboard without looking up. "This $10,000 withdrawal is amateur hour. He's got layers upon layers. But don't worry," she added with a quick, brilliant grin. "I love a good puzzle. The more complicated, the more fun it is to smash." We spent the next several hours in that cabin, the 4 of us. Megan, with her legal pad and razor-sharp questions, outlined the dual-pronged legal strategy. We would file for divorce on grounds of emotional and psychological abuse, supported by the evidence we were gathering. Concurrently, we would provide the SEC and federal authorities with everything we found on his financial crimes, making his destruction a legal certainty, not just a personal one. Chloe, meanwhile, was already pulling threads with terrifying speed. "Okay, so the $10,000 from your joint account went to Belle Epoque jeweler. A very, very expensive jeweler. Not for you, I assume?" she asked, glancing at me. I shook my head, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Figured. "I'm digging into his encrypted cloud storage now. He's sloppy. Thinks his money and his MBA make him invincible." Her eyes lit up as lines of code scrolled across her screen. "Bingo. I'm in. Let's see. Receipt for a diamond tennis bracelet. And hello, photo album. Naomi." She turned the screen around. It showed Robert with a stunning, much younger woman with cascading dark hair, the diamond bracelet glittering at her wrist. They were on a tropical beach, his arms slung around her bare shoulders. The photo was dated 2 weeks ago, when Robert had told me he was at a mandatory leadership retreat in Aspen. The visual evidence of the betrayal was a physical blow, a fresh wave of humiliation. But it was quickly followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated power. This was no longer my word against his. This was evidence. This was a weapon. "This is good," Megan said, her voice cool and clinical. "It establishes a pattern of deception and financial infidelity. But we need more. We need to prove the systematic financial manipulation. We need to prove he was actively planning to leave you destitute and potentially frame you." "I think I know where he might keep something like that," I said, the memory surfacing with crystalline clarity. A ledger. He has a hidden safe in his study, behind the wall of golf trophies. The one he had installed after his father died. He thought it was clever, hiding his secrets behind symbols of his victories. Daniel looked at me, a new, deep respect gleaming in his eyes. "We'll get it." As the sun began to set, painting the cloudy sky in muted hues of orange and purple, Megan and Chloe packed up their gear, leaving us with a detailed plan, a list of tasks, and a burner phone for secure communication. The cabin felt quiet again once their car had disappeared down the gravel drive, but the air was now permanently charged with a sense of grim purpose. With our allies gone, the strategic energy in the room shifted back to something more intimate, more primal. Daniel stood by the large window, watching the woods darken into silhouettes. "He never deserved you," he said quietly, his back to me. "He never saw you. Not the real you. He saw a beautiful canvas and tried to paint over the original masterpiece." I came to stand beside him, our shoulders not quite touching. He saw a thing to be acquired. A piece of art to hang on his wall, its value determined by his appraisal. Daniel turned to me, his eyes searching my face in the twilight. "And what do you see now? When you look in the mirror?" "I see the man who remembers the woman I was," I whispered, holding his gaze. "The one who isn't afraid to get her hands dirty. The one who wants to create, not just cure it. The one you woke up." He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone with a reverence that made my breath catch. "I see a warrior. I always have." This time, when he kissed me, it was different from the night before. It was slower, more profound. It was a conversation without words. A promise of a shared future. A vow to fight side by side. He led me back to the bedroom, but this time, he didn't carry me. He walked beside me, his hand firmly in mine, an equal partner in every sense. The second time we made love was an exploration. It was tender and languid, a deep, slow savoring of each other that felt both new and familiar, like rediscovering a favorite song. He took his time, learning the new landscape of my body, the slight, soft curve of my hip that hadn't been there at 25, the sensitive spot at the base of my throat that made me gasp, the way my breath hitched and my back arched when he traced the delicate line of my spine with his fingertips. There was no frantic hunger, only a profound, aching need to connect, to heal, to claim and be claimed in this new world we were building from the ashes. I was bolder, too. I let my hands roam freely over the hard plains of his chest and back, over the ridges of scars that mapped a life lived with danger and purpose. I kissed a particularly long, faded one that curved over his shoulder, a question in my eyes. "Shrapnel," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion that went beyond passion. "Syria. A long time ago." I didn't flinch. I didn't offer pity. I simply worshipped the scar with my lips, accepting every part of his past, every experience that had forged him, just as he was accepting every broken and reassembled piece of me. When we finally joined, it was with a deep, rolling rhythm that felt less like passion and more like destiny. We looked into each other's eyes, and I saw my future reflected there. Not a gilded cage, but an open field under a vast sky, full of possibility and built on a foundation of unshakable trust. Our release was a slow, building wave that crashed over us not with frantic cries, but with shared, shuddering sighs of completion and belonging. Afterward, we lay facing each other in the deepening dark, our legs entwined, our fingers linked on the pillow between us. The moon had risen, casting a silver light across the bed. "I never stopped loving you, Lauren," he said, his voice raw and vulnerable in the quiet. "I tried. God, I tried. I dated. I moved across the world. But you were always there, like a song I couldn't get out of my head. The melody of what could have been." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were healing tears, washing away the last of the residue Robert had left behind. I buried what I felt for you so deep I thought it was dead. I convinced myself that the safety I felt with Robert was love. But it was just quiet. It was the quiet of a museum. You're the noise of a living city. You're the storm. And you woke it all up. He leaned forward and kissed my forehead, a gesture of such tenderness it made my heart ache. We're going to win this. And then we're going to live. Really live. I want to see you in a studio covered in paint. I want to argue with you about books. I want to grow old with you and be grateful for every single damn day we get. The real world, however, was not so easily held at bay. My personal phone, which I had kept powered off, buzzed to life when Daniel plugged it into charge. It lit up like a Christmas tree, a barrage of notifications flooding the screen. Voicemails from Robert, his tone shifting in a chilling arc from condescending concern to simmering, barely contained rage. Lauren, this childishness has gone on long enough. Where are you? You're making a spectacle of yourself. Then later, do you have any idea the trouble you're causing? The police called. This is embarrassing. Texts from numbers I didn't recognize, likely his long-suffering assistants. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is very worried. Please call. Mr. Mitchell is concerned for your welfare. Then, a message that sent a jolt of pure dread through me. It was from my own mother. Lauren, Robert called. He said you had a terrible fight and you've run off. He says you're in a fragile state and might be a danger to yourself. Please, darling, call me. I'm worried sick. My blood ran cold. He was executing his plan with brutal efficiency. He was poisoning my own family against me, painting me as the unstable, hysterical wife who needed to be saved from herself. The isolation was becoming absolute. I showed the phone to Daniel, my hand trembling. His expression hardened into something dangerous. It's starting. The smear campaign. We need to move faster. He immediately called Megan on the secure line. He's contacting her family, spreading the narrative that she's unstable. We need to get to them first. On it, Megan's voice was crisp through the speakerphone. I'll have a discreet car sent for your mother, Lauren. We'll bring her here, show her the evidence, the photos, the financials. We need to control the narrative before he completely isolates you and builds a case for conservatorship. Next, he called Chloe. Can you access Lauren's social media? Her email? I need to know if he's tried to access them to plant evidence or monitor her communications. Already there, Chloe chirped, the sound of furious typing in the background. He hasn't tried to access anything yet, but I've set up tripwires on all her accounts. The moment he does, I'll know. I'll have a full trace, and I can feed him whatever false information we want. Also, I found something else interesting while you were busy. I could hear the smirk in her voice. He's been funneling money through a complex web of shell companies, but the main conduit is one called Apex Holdings. The paper trail leads to a private airstrip and a hangar in the Bahamas. He's not just hiding money, he's planning an exit strategy. He was getting ready to run. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Robert was preparing to run. The abandonment at the penthouse wasn't just a lesson in control, it was a rehearsal. He was testing my resilience, seeing how much of a fight I would put up, how quickly I would break. He never expected me to have a sanctuary. He never expected me to have a defender, who is also a strategist, a lover, who is also a soldier. That night, as Daniel and I sat by the rekindled fire, the reality of the battle settled around us, like a heavy cloak. It was no longer an abstract plan. It was a necessary, brutal fight for our future, for my very identity. He'll come looking for you, Daniel said, staring into the flames, his profile sharp and focused. When he realizes you're not broken, when he can't find you through conventional means, when his narrative starts to crack, he'll get desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. A shiver of genuine fear traced an icy path down my spine, but it was quickly followed by a surge of defiant courage. I had been afraid for so long. Afraid of his disapproval, his coldness, his anger. I would not be afraid anymore. Let him come, I said, my voice steady and clear in the quiet room. I'm not the woman he locked out anymore. Daniel looked at me, and the fierce, blazing pride in his eyes was a shield stronger than any metal. He reached for me, pulling me onto his lap, his arms a fortress around me. I know, he whispered against my hair, his voice filled with a love that felt like a weapon. And that's exactly what's going to destroy him. The trap was a work of art, woven from code, courage, and cold, hard evidence. Chloe became the architect, Daniel the infiltrator, and I the key that would unlock Robert's destruction. The safe, Chloe said, pointing to a detailed schematic of the penthouse on her primary monitor. You're absolutely sure it's behind the trophy case in his study? Positive, I confirmed, leaning over her shoulder. He had it installed secretly after his father died. He thought it was clever, hiding his secrets behind symbols of his victories. The arrogance was always his greatest weakness. Daniel studied the blueprint, his fingers tracing the emergency exit routes. The building's security system is mine. I designed the last update. I can get us in and out without triggering a single alarm. The internal cameras in the penthouse itself are the only problem. Not a problem, Chloe countered, a mischievous glint in her eye as her fingers flew across a secondary keyboard. I've been living inside your husband's digital life for a week. He uses a universal password for all his private networks, Apex One. He's so arrogantly predictable, it's almost sad. I can loop the feed from the penthouse cameras. They'll show an empty, peaceful apartment for as long as we need. He could be standing right in front of one, and the security desk would see an empty room. The plan was audacious. While Robert was at a black-tie fundraiser for the city's art museum, an event I was supposedly too unwell to attend, we would walk into his fortress and take what was ours. The irony of him being at an art gala while I reclaimed my own artistry wasn't lost on me. The night of the fundraiser, a deep, thrumming energy coursed between Daniel and me. It was a mix of fear, anticipation, and a fierce, shared purpose that felt like a living thing in the cabin. Dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, we drove back into the city, the familiar skyline a stark contrast to the peaceful woods we now called home. Remember, Daniel said, his hand resting on my thigh, a steadying pressure. In and out. 5 minutes maximum. You know the code for the safe. My birthday, I said, the irony bitter on my tongue. He said it was to remind him of what was most precious in his life. Now it would be the key to his undoing. We entered the building through a service entrance Daniel had flagged as under maintenance. The ride in the freight elevator was silent and tense, our reflections ghostly in the polished stainless steel. When the doors opened directly into our private foyer, my breath caught. The scene of my humiliation was now just a crime scene, waiting to be processed. It felt alien, this place that had been my home. The air was still and scentless, like a museum after hours. Daniel moved with a predator's grace, checking the rooms while I went straight to the study, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The trophy case was exactly as he'd left it, a shrine to his own ego. I moved the heavy, garish silver golf cup, awarded for winning a charity tournament he'd probably rigged, revealing the sleek digital keypad beneath. My fingers trembled only slightly as I typed in the numbers. A soft, affirmative beep, and the panel swung open with a whisper. Inside were stacks of crisp $100 bills, passports under different aliases, and a thick, leather-bound ledger. I grabbed it all, stuffing the contents into the dark backpack we'd brought. Lauren. Daniel's voice was a low, urgent warning from the doorway. We have company. Robert's car just pulled into the driveway. Early. My blood turned to ice. The loop is still active. He won't see us on camera, but he'll be here in 60 seconds. The fundraiser must have ended early. There was no time for the service elevator. We were trapped in his web. Follow me, Daniel said, his voice preternaturally calm. He led me not to the front door, but to the master bedroom, to the very balcony where this had all begun. The exterior service ladder, he said, pointing to a nearly invisible ladder running down the side of the building. For window washers. I noted it in the security audit as a vulnerability. Robert dismissed it as aesthetically displeasing and refused to spend the money to remove it. He swung a leg over the railing and held out his hand. Trust me. Below us, the city light swam, a dizzying drop to the manicured gardens 30 stories below. I heard the faint, distinctive ping of the private elevator arriving in our foyer. Robert was home. I took Daniel's hand without hesitation. We descended quickly, the cold, wet metal biting into our palms. 30 stories down, the wind whipped at our clothes, threatening to tear us from the rungs. We were halfway down when Robert stepped onto the balcony above us. We froze, pressing ourselves against the building's cool, glass surface. I could see the polished leather of his Italian shoes, the precise crease of his trousers. He was on the phone. "No, she's not here. The little fool is probably holed up in some cheap hotel, waiting for me to come begging." He laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that carried on the wind. "Let her stew. A few more days of this, and she'll be so broken she'll sign anything I put in front of her. By the time I'm done, she'll be begging me to take her back." He turned and went back inside, never glancing down, utterly confident in his dominion. We reached the ground and melted into the deep shadows of the garden, our hearts pounding in unison. My hands were raw, but the weight of the ledger in my backpack felt like a victory. We had stolen into the lion's den and taken his teeth. Back at the cabin, we spread the contents of the safe on the large wooden table. The passports, Canadian and British, were under the names Charles and Eleanor Wickham. The cash totaled over $200,000, but the ledger was the true treasure trove. It was a meticulous, handwritten record of every illicit transaction, every hidden account in the Caymans and Switzerland, every bribe to officials, and every payment to his mistresses, including a monthly stipend for Naomi. It was his confession, written in his own precise script. Chloe cross-referenced the data with her digital findings, her face alight with triumph. "It's all here. The shell companies, the embezzlement from his own investors' funds. This is beyond divorce, Lauren. This is criminal. With this, he's going to prison. The SEC and the FBI will have a field day." The days that followed were a whirlwind of clandestine activity, but the nights belonged to us. The night after our near discovery, the adrenaline had fused into a new, profound layer of intimacy. We had faced mortal danger together and won. The trust between us was now unshakable, forged in fire. We celebrated that night not with frantic passion, but with a deep, soulful connection. We made love by the firelight, on the thick sheepskin rug, the flames painting our skin in shifting hues of gold and shadow. It was a slow, worshipful act of reclamation. Every touch was a promise, every sigh a vow. We were no longer just lovers. We were accomplices, partners, one single, unified force against the world. Afterward, we lay tangled together, sharing a single glass of rich, red wine, the ledger and laptops forgotten for a few precious hours. "I was thinking," I said, my head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. "After this is over, I want to start again. Not as Robert Mitchell's wife. As Lauren. Just Lauren. I want to open a studio, teach art, actually make something again with my hands. Something real." He kissed my hair, his arms tightening around me. "I'll be there. Building the frames, handling the security, cleaning your brushes, whatever you need. I want to see you covered in clay and paint again, with that fierce look of concentration you get when you're in the flow." I've missed that woman. He remembered. He remembered the woman I'd been before the polish and the pressure, before I became a trophy. He wasn't just offering me a future, he was offering me back my past, my true self. That night, our lovemaking was a quiet, tender reaffirmation. It was the calm in the eye of the hurricane, a perfect, peaceful moment where the outside world ceased to exist. There was no Robert, no battle, no looming confrontation. There was only the two of us, wrapped in a bond that felt older than time, a love that had been tested by years and circumstance and had emerged stronger than any force that could be thrown against it. The storm broke on a Tuesday. Robert, realizing his concerned husband narrative was failing to bring me to heel, went public with a more aggressive strategy. He held a press conference on the steps of his corporate headquarters, the very picture of a concerned, grieving husband. His performance was masterful. "My wife, Lauren, is suffering from severe emotional distress," he told the gathered reporters, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. He looked into the cameras with practiced sincerity. She has been missing for days, and I fear for her safety. I am begging anyone with information to come forward. Lauren, if you can hear this, please come home. We can get you the help you need. I love you. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. He was painting himself as the heroic, patient husband and me as the fragile, unstable wife who needed to be saved from herself. Megan, watching the live feed with us in the cabin, smiled a thin, predatory smile. Perfect. He's just handed us the platform and the momentum. He's overplayed his hand. An hour later, we held our own press conference, not on the steps of a corporate citadel, but on the peaceful, rustic porch of the cabin. I did not look like a distressed, unstable woman. I wore a simple, elegant navy dress, my posture straight, my voice clear and steady as I looked into the lenses of the reporters Megan had discreetly invited. Daniel stood just inside the door, a solid, protective presence, out of camera shot, but his energy a tangible force fueling my own. Megan stood beside me as I addressed the small but influential group. My husband, Robert Mitchell, is not a concerned spouse. He is my abuser. I began, my gaze unwavering from the cameras. He systematically isolated me, controlled me, and psychologically tormented me for 3 years. 1 week ago, after I dared to express an opinion he disagreed with, he locked me out of our 30-story penthouse in a freezing rainstorm as punishment. His public concern is a lie. It is a calculated attempt to discredit me and hide his extensive financial crimes. I then held up a digital tablet, displaying a curated selection of evidence. These are records of the hidden accounts, the embezzlement from his investors, the shell companies. We are providing this evidence to the authorities today. My husband isn't a grieving man. He is a criminal who is planning to abandon his investors, his employees, and his wife. The reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. The story exploded across financial news networks and social media. The narrative flipped in a single afternoon from troubled wife of tech CEO missing to tech titan accused of massive fraud and psychological abuse. Robert's meticulously constructed world began to implode in real time. News vans surrounded his office building. The board of his company called an emergency meeting. His stock price began a precipitous, terrifying plunge. He called my phone relentlessly. I let every call go to voicemail, each message a perfect snapshot of his escalating rage and desperation. _You conniving bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? He snarled in one message. They're freezing the accounts. The board is talking about ousting me. This is your fault. He raged in another. Then a colder, more threatening tone. I'll find you, Lauren. Wherever you're hiding. I'll make you pay for this. The final message was the most satisfying. His voice was a broken, desperate whisper. The mask of the powerful CEO completely gone. Please. Please call me back. We can fix this. We can work this out. I'll give you anything you want. He was in free fall, and he knew it. The man who had left me shivering in the rain to teach me a lesson about power was now the one stranded in the cold, watching everything he had built, his empire, his reputation, his invincible facade, crumble to dust around him. The lesson was almost complete, but the most satisfying part of his downfall was yet to come. The legal and financial avalanche we triggered was swift and merciless. The SEC launched a formal investigation, freezing Robert's assets and those of his company. His board of directors, faced with the evidence Chloe had anonymously leaked to them, voted unanimously to suspend him, then oust him entirely. The Apex Holdings airstrip in the Bahamas was seized by international authorities, along with the private jet he'd been preparing for his escape. The walls were closing in, and he had nowhere to run. But the final, personal confrontation, the one that would seal his fate in the court of public opinion and in my own heart, happened not in a courtroom, but in the neutral, sterile conference room of Megan's law firm. Robert had requested it, through his new, visibly overwhelmed attorney. He wanted to talk about the divorce, he said. A settlement. A last, desperate attempt to regain some shred of control. Megan, Daniel, and I arrived together. I wore the sharp, charcoal gray suit I'd bought for this moment, a suit Robert had never seen, in a color he'd once told me was too aggressive for a woman. It was my armor. Daniel was beside me in a dark, tailored jacket and jeans, a silent, formidable presence. He wasn't just my bodyguard. He was my equal, my foundation, my future. Robert was already there, seated at the long, polished mahogany table. He looked like a photograph that had been left in the sun, faded and cracked. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot and shadowed. The aura of invincible power had evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered man who smelled of fear and stale coffee. His eyes swept over me, taking in my confident posture, my steady gaze, and then they fixed on Daniel, standing close behind my chair, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. The quiet possessiveness in that gesture, the unshakable intimacy, was a declaration of war more potent than any legal filing. "I see," Robert said, his voice a dry rasp. "So this is what it's about. You're leaving me for the help." The contempt in his voice was a weak, last-ditch effort to assert dominance. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze squarely. "I'm leaving you because you're a criminal and a bully, Robert. Daniel is who I'm choosing to build a life with after you. A real life." His composure shattered. "A life? With him?" He let out a derisive snort. "What kind of life? Playing house in some shack in the woods? You're throwing away everything we built for this mercenary?" He spat the word, but it lacked its intended force. It was the desperate cry of a man who had lost his power to intimidate. Daniel's hand tightened on my shoulder, a silent signal of support, but he remained silent, letting me lead this battle. This was my victory to claim. "We built nothing," I said, my voice cold and clear, echoing in the tense room. "You built a prison. I was the decoration. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a possession. And when I started to think for myself, you tried to break me. You locked me out in the rain. But you failed." He slammed his hand on the table, the sharp crack making Megan's associate jump. "I gave you everything. A life you could only dream of. And you repay me by destroying me? By spreading these lies." "They're not lies," Megan interjected smoothly, sliding a thick folder across the glossy tabletop. "These are the sworn affidavits from the elderly investors you defrauded, including Mrs. Eleanor Hartley. This is the forensic analysis from Ms. Bennett tracing every dollar you embezzled. And this," she said, tapping a second, thinner folder with a perfectly manicured nail, "is the psychological evaluation you commissioned on Lauren, without her knowledge, in your attempt to build a case for her incompetence. The doctor's notes are quite clear. He found no instability, only a woman suffering from the effects of prolonged psychological abuse. He noted, and I quote, a systematic campaign of gaslighting and coercive control." Robert stared at the folders as if they were venomous snakes. His chest heaved. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly gray pallor. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and exposed on every front. "I loved you," he whispered, the words a desperate, final gambit, an attempt to appeal to a history that had never truly existed. And this is the moment I want to pause and ask you, my incredible audience, can you imagine the sheer audacity? The man who left me stranded in a storm, now claiming it was love. If this story of facing down a manipulator is giving you chills, if you're feeling that surge of justice right now, then do not wait. Hit that like button right now. Let's get this video to 50,000 likes and show the world that stories of courage and consequence matter. Every like tells YouTube this is content worth promoting. Thank you. "No," I said, and the finality in my voice made him physically flinch. "You don't know what love is. Love doesn't lock someone out in the rain. Love doesn't steal and lie and manipulate and try to destroy someone's spirit. You loved the idea of me, the perfect accessory for your perfect life. Now you have nothing. No company, no money,
no reputación,
and no me." His eyes darted between Daniel and me, and I saw the moment the last flicker of fight left him. The reality of his utter and complete defeat crashed down upon him. He had lost everything. The kingdom was ashes. "Get out, Robert," I said softly, the power in the room having shifted irrevocably to my side of the table. He stood, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, like a marionette with its strings cut. He didn't look at me again. He didn't look at anyone. He just turned and walked out of the room, a hollow man, a ghost of his former self. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed was profound, peaceful, and absolute. Then Daniel let out a long, slow breath. He turned my chair to face him, his hands cupping my face. His eyes were shining with a ferocious, proud love. "You are magnificent," he murmured, and then he kissed me, right there in front of Megan and her team, a kiss of victory, of passion, of a future seized back from the jaws of a terrible past. Megan quietly gathered her papers, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "I'll give you two a moment. The paperwork for the divorce, based on this, will be a formality." He has no leverage left. The divorce was finalized with stunning speed. Robert, facing multiple federal indictments for wire fraud and embezzlement, had no leverage left. I was awarded the penthouse, which I immediately sold, the proceeds going into a trust to repay his defrauded investors, a significant portion of the remaining liquid assets, and my full, unencumbered freedom. The ironclad prenuptial agreement he'd been so proud of was rendered moot by his criminal conduct and the evidence of abuse. With my share of the proceeds, I didn't buy another cage. I bought a light-filled, sprawling loft in a converted warehouse district, its massive, factory-style windows overlooking the river. One half was to be our home, filled with the comfortable, meaningful clutter of a life lived together. The other half, with its high ceilings and perfect northern light, was for my studio. I named it Aegis Studios. A shield, a place of protection and creation, for myself and for other women finding their voice through art. The grand opening was 6 months later. The space was alive with energy, filled with the vibrant scent of turpentine, fresh coffee, and hope. My paintings, bold, textured, emotional abstract landscapes that were a world away from the bland, corporate art Robert had favored, lined the white walls. The people milling about were a mix of old friends I joyfully reconnected with, new artists I was already mentoring, and the strong, brilliant women who had become my unshakable inner circle, Megan, Chloe, and my mother, who now knew the whole truth and stood by me, her face radiant with relief and pride. Daniel moved through the crowd, handing out drinks, his easy smile a world away from the guarded man I'd first reconnected with. He was in his element here, not as a soldier or a bodyguard, but as a partner. My partner. He caught my eye from across the room and winked, a simple gesture that filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the gallery lights. Later that night, after the last guest had left, and we were surrounded by the quiet chaos of empty glasses and overflowing congratulatory bouquets, we stood together by the vast windows. The city lights twinkled like a field of diamonds below, the river a dark, silken ribbon weaving through it all. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his solid chest. He nuzzled my neck, his breath warm and familiar against my skin. "Proud of you," he murmured, his voice a low vibration I felt through my whole body. I turned in his arms, linking my hands behind his neck. I had a smudge of phthalo blue paint on my cheek, and he had a matching one on his shirt. We were a mess. We were perfect. "This is the life I wanted," I whispered, looking around at the studio, at our home, at him. "This is the woman I am." He didn't answer with words. He swept me into his arms and carried me from the studio, through the wide, open doorway that separated our work life from our private one, and into our bedroom. This time, our lovemaking was a pure, unadulterated celebration. It was the joyful, uninhibited union of two people who had fought their way through fire and emerged, hand in hand, into the sunlight. There was no past haunting us, no future looming with uncertainty. There was only this perfect, present moment, this profound gratitude, this love that felt as vast and deep as the night sky outside our window. Afterward, we lay in the tangle of sheets, the city, lights our only blanket. His hand was splayed possessively on my stomach, and I covered it with my own. "I want to have a baby," I said into the quiet darkness. The words were not a question, but a statement of fact, a declaration of the beautiful, messy, authentic life we would build. I felt his breath catch. He shifted, rising up on an elbow to look down at me. In the dim light, his eyes were wide, shimmering with unchecked emotion. A single tear traced a path through his stubble. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice thick with a hope so profound it shook me. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said, echoing the words I'd spoken to him in the cabin a lifetime ago. "With you." He kissed me then, a kiss so filled with love and promise that it felt like a sacred vow. "Then let's make a baby," he whispered against my lips. And we did. Not that night, but in the many nights that followed. In our loft above the city, in the home we had built together, not on a foundation of control and fear, but on one of trust, passion, and a love that had weathered the storm and emerged, like me, unbreakable. A year to the day after Robert locked me out in the rain, I stood in my studio, my hand resting on the swell of my pregnant belly, looking at a blank canvas. It was a cold, rainy night, but inside, it was warm, filled with the smell of Daniel's cooking and the sound of soft jazz drifting from our speakers. My phone buzzed on the workbench. A news alert. Robert Mitchell had been sentenced. 15 years in a federal penitentiary, with no chance of parole. The finality of it was a quiet echo, a distant door closing on a terrible chapter one had already left behind. Daniel came up behind me, his hands coming to rest on my belly, feeling the powerful kick of our son. He kissed my temple. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft, knowing the weight of the news. I looked from the blank canvas, full of infinite potential, to the man I loved, to the life growing inside me. I thought of the women who had already found refuge and purpose through the outreach programs funded by Aegis Studios. I thought of the art I was creating, the life I was building, stitch by joyful stitch. Robert had tried to teach me a lesson about power. He thought power was control, domination, the ability to make someone feel small. He was wrong. I leaned back into Daniel's embrace, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart against my back, the same heart that had offered me a hand in the rain. "I'm perfect," I said. And I was. The woman he left in the rain was gone. In her place was a creator, a protector, a lover, a mother. The storm he'd meant to break me had instead washed me clean, leaving behind someone stronger, someone softer, someone truly, completely free. The ultimate revenge wasn't his destruction. It was my boundless, everyday, glorious joy. And that is the end of our story. But now I have one final, crucial request for you, my incredible supporters. If this journey from victim to victor moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, then I need you to take 2 simple actions. First, share this video. Share it with anyone who needs to see that dawn always comes after the darkest night. Your share could be the lifeline someone desperately needs. And second, subscribe to Women Revenge. Ring the bell so you never miss our next story of courage, strategy, and the sweet, satisfying taste of justice. We are a community of survivors, and your support is our oxygen. Now, I'm turning it over to you. Tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you are reclaiming for yourself this year? Your voice? Your dreams? Your power? I read every single one. Thank you for watching, for believing, and for being part of this journey.